Does anybody know what genealogy is? If I say to you genealogy honor, what are we going to look at today?
Oh, so we've got Alex who's come straight in with family history.
Correct, Alex. We are going to look today at family history. I've put on the screen for you, I hope you've downloaded your worksheets already, but I've put on the screen for you the requirements. I'm not going to read them through now. We're going to go through each of them individually this afternoon, and you will be able to fulfill. Now, a lot of these requirements are some things that you have to do. I can help you. I can give you the background information. I can give you directions in which to follow, but a lot of it is what you have to do. This is your research. I've done my research and I will show you examples and give you tips on things to do, but a lot of this is your family history. Where do you come from? How do you trace? So again, we'll look at the different ways, talking to family members, finding out how to record your information, looking at historical records, visiting libraries or genealogy centers, visiting cemeteries. Might be a new idea for some of you, but these are things that we do. So our first requirement says to define the following words, and someone, Alex, already gave us the first answer, the correct answer, genealogy. So genealogy is the study of a family's ancestry or history. An ancestor is a person who you descended from. So my great-grandmother is, no, I am my great-grandmother's ancestor. A descendant is the person who is the offspring of that specific ancestor. So my brother and I are descendants of my grandfather. A spouse is either a member of a married couple. So my spouse is my husband. I was talking to a man, he'd say my spouse is my wife. So it's either the husband or the wife of the couple. A sibling is a person having at least one parent in common with the other. So I have one sibling, I have one brother. Some of you may have lots of siblings, you may have many brothers and many sisters. So you will have many siblings. Why research genealogy? Well, lots of people may have many reasons why they want to research genealogy, but I've got a few here on the screen. It may be for personal or medical reasons. Might be curiosity. Who am I? Where do I come from? Are there any hereditary diseases in my family? If I can trace and see that my great-grandfather died of heart disease and my grandfather died of heart disease, is there a possibility that my father may get heart disease or I may get heart disease? So some people sometimes want to know this because of family diseases. Community and religious obligations. Well, if you research, it says that in some Eastern Asian countries, you follow the practice of ancestor worship. In other words, to respect for one's family is the foundation of a healthy society. So they do this for community reasons. LDS stands for Latter-day Saints. They have a doctrine of baptism for the dead. So in other words, somebody that's still living can be baptized on behalf of someone who's already died. So they do that for religious obligations. Maybe you're researching for establishing identity. The royal family, they keep records to establish the right to rule. Who can become the next king or queen? Because we know where the family line comes from. And some countries allow citizenship based on genealogy. I think Ireland I looked at. And if your grandparent is Irish, even though you might be born there or your parents might not be born there, you can claim the citizenship of that country. And sometimes research is done for legal or forensic research. A lawyer in a probate case, someone has died, who inherits all their money and all their land. And so lawyers, sometimes they go and they trace the heirs of this property in order to hand it over. Well, for me, just to give you a brief introduction of why I started genealogy, and many, many years ago, in fact, probably before all of you Pathfinders were even born, I was curious, I was nosy. I wanted to know, where did my family come from? I knew my parents, I knew my aunts and uncles, I knew my grandparents, well, most of them, but I didn't know anything apart from that. My mum was one of 3 children, but my nana was the only one in her family. Her mum wasn't married, so she didn't have a father that we knew about, and she didn't have any brothers and sisters. And my grandpa also was the only child of an unmarried mother. So my mum had no aunts, uncles, or cousins. So I thought, fantastic, it's going to be such a short family. Such a short family history. Well, boy, was I mistaken. I was so mistaken with that one. So my journey started because I was curious. So let's take a look at the biblical genealogy. Let's take a look at the genealogy of Christ. You have to be able to complete and to be able to tell where in the Bible, where in the New Testament can you find the genealogy of Jesus? Well, I've given you the 2 texts there, and you can look them up and you can read them and you can find out about the genealogy of Jesus. The requirement asks you to write out this genealogy and begin with Adam. Well, on your worksheet, and here on this example, I have given you from Luke. Now you can choose if you want to take it from Matthew's version. By all means, you can write it out from Matthew's version. If you want to do both, again, you can do them. I decided this time I'm not giving you all the answers. I'm actually going to make you do some of the work. So I've given you some of the names along the way. I've given you Adam, I've given you Noah, Abram, Boaz, Simeon. I've given you some of the names, but the rest you have to work out. You might already know some of these. Let's see if anybody knows. Okay, we know Adam. Who can tell me Adam's son? Who do we have from Adam's son? Does anybody know what the S stands for after Adam?
Yeah, we've got, Pathfinder's definitely on the ball here. We've got Seth coming up.
Excellent, we've got Seth. Okay, let's see if we know from Noah. Who comes after Noah? What does the S stand for after Noah? Yeah, quick on the mark today, I can see.
They haven't quite, yep, here we are. Answers are starting to come through. Facebook, we're waiting for you. But it's okay, so we've got Shem, and somebody's put the brother Ham as well.
Okay, yes. So the direct descendant of Jesus is the S, that's Shem. Okay, go further down and you can see I have marked one of them in red. And there's a reason I've marked it in red. So we have Boaz. Can anybody name the next 3? The O, the J, and the D. We've got Boaz. Who came after Boaz?
Oh, yeah, wow. Sinkumo is definitely on the ball. We've got all 3 coming here. Obed,
excellent.
Jesse, and then David.
Okay, Obed, Jesse, and then David. There's a reason why I've marked the D for David in red. And there is, possibly when you read it for the first time, and I must admit, before I read it completely and understood it fully, I thought, why does one version of the Bible say up to David, they're both the same? And then from David, Luke seems to go in one direction and Matthew seems to go in a different direction. Can anybody think, or does anybody know why that might be? Why might the 2 books of the Bible give slightly different answers or slightly different names? So up to David were the same. And then Luke has a different name that comes after David than from what Matthew says.
I think you might have stumped them here, Judy.
Okay, then let's look at the next slides. And maybe you can see it here in the graphic. As I said, go all the way along the line, start at Adam, go all the way down to David. And then in Luke's version of the Bible, Nathan comes. And that's what the N is in your sheet. But if you read the other line, Matthew's line, it mentions Solomon. And I didn't quite understand this until I looked. And if you follow the blue line down, you'll see, okay, it's different till you get down here. We've got Zerubbabel and Shealtiel. And the blue line is Joseph's line, so Jesus' father's line. And the pink line, which comes down here, is the line of Mary. So that's why they're slightly different names, but it's still the same genealogy of Jesus. Our third requirement. Now, I must say, the information I'm giving you today is based on a lot of the research that I have done and the places I have looked at, and I would say it's taken more from a British perspective. But I do understand that you're not all in the UK and Ireland, that some of you may be joining us from the North American division, you might be joining us from United Arab Emirates, you may be joining us from some of the African countries, and not all of the information will be the same. So you will have to contextualize the information I give you today into your specific area where you are living, because it may not be the same. A lot of it can be, and the internet is amazing these days that I can sit in any part of the world and I can find information on various different countries. So you don't all have to be in the same country, but it may be that some of the different places you have to look are different. So 5 places to obtain information. Well, I think the most important thing is, and the one to start with, is talk to your family. Ask your family what they know. Talk to your mum and dad. They will know things about themselves. They'll probably know things about their parents. If you have grandparents, talk to your grandparents. They will know about themselves. They'll know about your family. They'll know possibly about their parents. And the further back you can go, the more people you can talk to in your family, the more information you're likely to get. As I said, the internet is a huge source of information. You can find it often in libraries. You can look for vital records, so birth, death, marriage, divorce records. You can look for adoption records. It's a little more difficult when you're looking for adoption files, but those are resources. Religious records. You can search for church records, for baptism, for marriage, for funerals, for the people who were members of the church. You can check for immigration and naturalization records. Ellis Island in America is where the ships used to go in and where all the records were kept of all the people that immigrated into America and Canada, and also the naturalization records. The Mormon Church, as I mentioned before, they have such a huge, large collection of census records, of birth, death, marriages, that they have scanned from all of the records that they can find throughout the world. And it's an amazing source. It's on the internet, and I will give you a lot of the links and a lot of the places to look later. Census data. Cemeteries. May not be your first idea of where to go for a walk or where to go for research, but a cemetery is so much information. Shipping records, military records, obituaries, newspapers, and DNA matches are some. Some societies that can help with your general research. Well, you have the National Archives in London. You have a Society for Genealogists. You've got Federation of East European Family History, if you think that your family may have come from Eastern Europe. You've got historical and genealogical societies of the US, America. You've got Irish genealogy, research societies. You've got family history federations. And I put in a Wikipedia link because it also gives you a lot more places that may be more relevant around the world. So you can put into any search engine on the internet and find out where these are relevant for your specific location. 4 steps 4 very important steps for research. Well, the first I would say is to analyze what you already know. Interview your family, check for any records that you may have in your house or those of your relatives. Your parents are bound to have your birth certificate somewhere in the house. It's most likely that they would have their birth certificate somewhere in the house, or a passport, or maybe if you have been dedicated, there might be some information there. So talk to your family, check all the things that you can, and also check and see if anybody else has done research in your family. Has somebody else done it? What can you start with? Start with what you know. Decide what you want to accomplish from your search. Now, it may sound a bit strange to say this, but are you just interested in knowing the names of the people that came before you, what your grandparents, your great-grandparents, or are you interested in knowing where they lived, what jobs they had, did they travel or immigrate, do you have family overseas, do you have living relatives that you know nothing about? And all of these are very important, and especially if your family have possibly immigrated to this country, then you know that your family have immigrated, that your parents or grandparents may have been the first people to come to United Kingdom. So then you know you have family overseas, but you may not know about the aunts or uncles or cousins or second cousins that are related in these families. Be organized and systematic. Which side of the family are you researching first? Now, I'm sure you want to know everything about every side of your family, but remember that you are the first person. You have 2 parents. Your parents have 2 parents, whether they're together or whether they're not, but biologically they have 2 parents. So you have 4 grandparents. Then they have 2 parents. So every step of it goes out and out and out, and you have more people. So I would recommend that you pick a side of the family. Do you want to start with mum's side of the family? Do you want to start with dad's side of the family? Organize yourself by location. If you know that, say, your mum's side of the family came from England, then concentrate on finding everything you can in that area and everything that you need or that you want or that you can find. And then you can move on to the different areas. Otherwise, it becomes sometimes a bit overwhelming and it becomes sometimes a bit confusing. And I would say then begin your search. Search the internet for all the information you can find and learn to be a detective. You will have to do a lot of detective work. I like that. I think if I had any other career, I think I would want to work for the Secret Service to find out all the secrets and I'd love to be a detective. I'd love to find out all these things. Learn to be a detective and follow all the clues that you can to find out the information. Documentation. Now, this is a word that they use quite a lot, but what is the purpose of documentation? Documents, you know, articles, things that you have that you can have. Well, you want to document. The purpose is to check and to validate the data. You want to check, is this correct? Is this actually what happened? Is this actually the dates that I know about? Or are the dates slightly different? By using documented data, you won't run the risk of duplicating efforts that somebody else has made. So if you keep a record of it and you've got it all written down and somebody else starts, you say, well, I've already done up until my great-grandfather. You don't have to do that because I know the information. You can also pass on this information to future generations. What you've researched, keep together and others can find. There's a satisfaction in actually viewing the artifacts, and I'll show you some examples of these. You can help others, or others can help you to continue the search if you reach a dead end. And trust me, you will reach dead ends. There's only so much in time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of dedication, but sometimes you just hit that and you think, I cannot find, there were too many people who had the name Tom Jones or who had the name John Smith. I think I knew where it came from. This was the year's one, but there's just too many. And sometimes you reach that dead end, but then others can help you. And you also want to do it so that you don't get confused or forget anything that you've already researched. It asks us to define a primary source and a secondary source for documentation. Well, a primary source, it's also known as an original source, is a document or a recording or some source of information, a paper, a picture that was created at the time by someone in authority with a direct knowledge. So it's the first line of contact. It's the person who was at the scene. It was the person who was there at the time. It was the person who took the picture. They're your primary source of information. They know it firsthand. A birth, a death, a marriage certificate. Sometimes if your parents or grandparents, they may ask them if they have a family Bible. It used to be that they would have big, thick family Bibles. And every time someone was born or married or died, the information was written inside. Sometimes you might find letters that describe the event. The person involved actually wrote it. So those are primary sources. With that in mind, a secondary source is it relates to something that happened, but it wasn't firsthand, so to speak. So somebody else is writing about it, they're generalizing, they're analyzing, they're interpreting the information that was found. So it might be a history book, it might be the internet or a letter that was written well after the event. Maybe your grandmother wrote a letter to your mother 20 years later and said, oh, by the way, did I tell you that you had an aunt so-and-so and so-and-so that lived in so-and-so? But they weren't actually there, they were telling of history. Oral histories, as I say, someone that didn't have first-hand knowledge, but that was relating to the event. And sometimes primary and secondary are relative terms. Some sources may be classified as primary or secondary, depending on how they're used. So now I've got some examples for you here. And I'd like you to tell me the letter on the left-hand side. Is it a primary source or is it a secondary source? So the letter, is it a primary source of information or is it a secondary source of information?
Okay, so we need some help with our chat windows. Is that what you need?
Yes, I'd like to know. If you can't make it out clearly on the letter, if you can't make out the writing, I'll read you the first line. It says, "My dear daughter." So do we think this is written as a primary source of information or is this written as a secondary source of information?
Okay, on Zoom, they are saying primary.
It's a primary source. This is a letter that is being written from a mother to a daughter, and it contains information that the mum cannot pass on the Christmas card because the father and Tom, who was the brother, are both at sea. So the mum's writing to her daughter and saying, sorry, I can't pass on your Christmas card. Your dad and your brother, they're at sea at the moment. On the right-hand side, I've been instructed to acquaint you that Alexander Broomfield died in the Royal Infirmary this day on the 8th of the 9th. Oh no, I can't read it now. Anyway. Oh, it's the time as well. So is this a primary source or is this a secondary source? At the bottom it says your obedient servant, and then he's got his title as head porter.
Okay, so this is from headquarters about somebody who passed away at a facility.
A death notification.
Death notification. Okay, they are voting on Zoom that it's secondary. But Avonleaf says that has a little bit of a, but it sounds kind of like a primary. So they're kind of, you said that it depended on some factors, and I think that's what that Pathfinder is feeling, that it might be either one or the other depending.
Correct, it could be. It's saying, I have been instructed to acquaint you. Now the person signing it at the bottom is the head porter, and he's writing it obviously to the people. So it could be that the head porter was the person who says, right, I have to tell you that your child has died. Or it could be that that's just their title and somebody else has said to them, okay, can you just write to the family, and gives them this notification. So let's see about these two. Here on the left, we have the summary of Alexander's voyages to sea. And it's a breakdown of all the times that he was out the ships, how long he went out for, what age he was. Do we think this is primary or secondary?
Wow, that's a tough one. Well, it's split here. Someone's saying secondary, Avanel saying primary. So I don't know. I think, oh, Stevens putting secondary.
In this case, it is secondary. This is not actually officially written down shipping records. This was a summary that someone who was studying the family genealogy actually put together. So they've gone to the official records and they've typed it up and said, right, this is the information. Now the one on the obituary, what do we think of this?
An obituary is a fancy word of stating that somebody has died,
Somebody
right?
has died, so it's a notification that somebody has died. And this was actually taken from the British Union Conference Messenger, as it would have been, I think it was called something slightly different before then, but a notification, say in the church magazine, of someone has died. Now, do we think this is primary or secondary?
Again, this is split. We've got one saying primary, one saying secondary. So I think you've stumped them with this one.
This one actually is very interesting, because if you look at the initials at the very bottom, it says GB Craven. They've written it. So they're writing it about Robert Boyd Haining. And you think, first of all, okay, it's just someone that has written this, and they don't know them. But actually, when you look down towards the very bottom, it says Dr. Haining is survived by 4 sisters. Mrs. Marie Craven. Did you recognize that name? Craven. And then mentions the other sister's name. So actually, the person who is writing this is the brother-in-law of the person who has died. So again, this is where it says sometimes it can be primary, secondary, and sometimes it can actually be a bit of both, because he's actually the brother-in-law. So he is telling from a first-hand experience, but he's also giving details that maybe he didn't know all of the details. He knew the person, but he didn't know all of the details. Well done. This is your practical elements. You have to prepare a 4-generational family chart, beginning with yourself. Now, if you have, this is just an example here, and you've got it on your worksheet. You are the 1st generation on this tree. Your parents are going to be the 2nd generation on the tree. Your grandparents are going to be the 3rd generation on the tree, and your great-grandparents are going to be the 4th generation. So for this award, you only need to create 4 generations. Now, I've given you here a sample of mine. I started with myself, and yes, I omitted my year of birth deliberately. Now, when you do yours, the most important thing for doing genealogy is writing as much information as possible. I've only given you an example here, but when you come to do it, you should give more details than what's actually on mine. I've simply, because of the space I had and because I wanted it to be quite large for you to be able to see, I literally only put the year of birth and the year of death. However, when you do genealogy, put the day, put the month, and put the year. So if you know that the person was born on the 1st of January, 1917, then you would put birth, 1st of January, 1917. Put the place that they were born. I've given you the places they were born. I haven't located the places they died, although I know. So put as much information into your tree as possible, because the more information you can put in, the more information you gather, the better it will be for genealogy. Also, when you come to do this, and not specifically for this exercise, but marriage dates, find out when they were married, find out where they were married, what date, was it in a church, was it in a registry office, was it in another location, but find out where, when, and include all of their names. So include full names if possible. You will notice when you do a genealogy tree that when you look at your mum's side, now I understand that I'm being very general with this and it doesn't fit everybody's situation. Not all couples are married, not all parents are married, not all grandparents were married. So I understand that it's different for every single person's tree. I'm just giving you the example of my tree. When it comes to a married couple, say it's your parents or your grandparents who are married, you always write down the female's name in her maiden name, the name in which she was born. So you will see here, I've put Andrew Morrison Mackay, that is my dad's name. And my mum was Lillian Russell by birth. That was the name in which she was born. Although they are married now, you always put for genealogy the maiden name, the name in which they were born. Now you will see some examples if you look through this, that when you go to my grandfather, George Patterson Russell, that his father's not Russell. As I say, not all situations are the same, not all situations are that the parents were married. So he took his mum's maiden name because they were not married. So that just gives you an example, but always write down for females the maiden name before they were married. It asks us to list ways to record our genealogy information. And there are various ways in which you can record. Here is an example, and one example is a family tree chart. You can write things down in the chart. You can put all the information into a chart. Another idea is to use a computer genealogy program. You can find these on the internet. You can buy them. You can use them, and they're also another source of saving all your information and helping you to trace your tree and helping you to store the information in your tree. You can use family group sheets where the information is written out in a sheet form. The husband's details, the wife's details, the child's details, and then you would get different pages for the grandparents, for the aunts and uncles, and you can record it this way. So I'm just giving you here an example of my tree that I have done. I've used a computer program and I use Ancestry to do mine. So on Ancestry, I can put all the information that I know into the tree. I can add photos, I can download information, I can upload information, and it helps me to build the tree. I started actually with an Excel spreadsheet, and I used to put things into an simple Excel spreadsheet and just put in the people and then draw the lines and make my own tree. And that's a simple way that you can do it if you want. There are many options online as well that you can look into. This is also a practical thing that we need to do. It says research your family history by talking or writing to your oldest relative. And that was what I started with. That's the first source of information, the people in your family who actually know the information. So work out who the oldest person is, your oldest relative, or maybe it's not necessarily your closest relative. Maybe you can't physically go and talk to them. Maybe you have to write them emails or phone them because you can't physically go visit them. But let them know that you'd like, that you're interested, that you're doing your family history, and they might surprise you with a lot of information you didn't know. You might get to read love letters your great-grandfather wrote to your great-grandmother. They might have photographs you've never seen, or hear stories of people that have long since passed that you'll not actually meet. And maybe you'll get to learn things that you didn't know about, even the ones that you do know, even your parents, who knows? A good idea, you could do it now, record what they tell you. Record all the information, have a phone or have some other device to record that you can listen to over and over again, and then you can also take notes more easily on this. And ask the following questions. What's your first memory? When and where were you born? Do you remember the first church that you attended, if that's applicable? The name of schools, location where they attended? Where did they live when they were 10 and 14? Ask them, did our ancestors immigrate? And if so, from which country? Where and when were they married, if they have been married? And if they had children, please give the names, the places, and the dates of birth. And then once you've finished, once you've done your research and your relatives helped them, write to them and thank them for their time and send them a photograph of yourself. And maybe ask them if they'd be willing to send and share a copy of an older family photo that you may never have seen. It's always interesting to be able to see older photographs and to use them. Things you could investigate with your relative. Now ask parental permission, maybe use Google Street Maps to see where the schools and the early houses, the churches, anywhere that your relative has mentioned, look at it on Google Maps. Look and see whether or not these places still exist. I can tell you that neither my primary school, nor my secondary school, nor the college that I actually attended, none of them exist anymore. They've all been taken down and housing estates now are there. So it may be that these places don't exist anymore. It may be that a supermarket stands now where your grandparents' school used to be. Print out a modern photo. Say you have the house that they used to live in, and print out a photograph if the house still exists of what it looks like now and see how it has changed. I've done this. I've been to locations where my great-grandmother lived and had a business and where my grandmother was born, just to see, because I've always heard my mom and her sisters talk about, this is where it was, I knew the address. I felt like I knew the address, but I'd never been there. So print out the photos and go and see. Look at maps to see what it looked like in the times when your ancestors lived there. Maybe it's changed. As I said, I went to my great-grandmother's place and there's a huge big Morrison's supermarket opposite now. But I'm sure that didn't exist for many, many years. Probably even when my mum would visit her grandmother there, it didn't exist. And if you or your relatives are from another country or a distant part of the same country, you may never have seen these locations. As I say, I've traveled. You can travel so much through the internet now that it's so much easier to do it than it used to be. Most likely you'll take your relative on a trip down memory lane if these places still exist. They can say, oh, that used to be there, or the train station was there, and see how they will like to be part of your genealogy search. And this part asks you to be practical. It asks you to make a historical record of your life. Include the genealogy chart that you have to do. Include any records about yourself. Maybe it might be a copy of your birth certificate, or it may be pictures. As you see, I put pictures there of my first day of school. It may be stories from your life. It may be your report card. And it may just be that you have to make photocopies of these things, because I'm sure your parents don't want to necessarily give you your actual birth certificate to be part of this honor, but they'll happily give you a copy of it to put in your historical record that you want to create. And once you've done everything, you can share it with your group or with your club or with your school. And if any of you were part actually of the scrapbooking honor that I did before, scrapbooking is also a very useful way to present personal and family history. And I've put the link in there for the honor just in case you wanted to see that, and you can do it in that way. I've put together a couple of slides where I can show you part of my historical journey. We've got the boat up there that some of my relatives emigrated to the States in. We've got a picture of those relatives there, that was the ship in which they sailed, the people sitting next to it when they emigrated from Scotland and went out to America. I've got a picture of my grandfather up in the corner. I didn't actually know my grandfather because even though I was alive, he died when I was 2.5. So I know of him, but I don't know him. So seeing photographs of him is interesting because I feel like I've heard so many stories about him, but I don't know him. But this is him with his siblings. At the bottom, I've given you some death certificates. Death certificates actually of my grandfather up in the top. He's standing behind the lady with the white hat. So that is my grandfather. And the death certificate down in the corner is actually of his father, who died at the age of 29. So he died very, very young. A picture of my parents and I is part of my journey. And then the letter there that you can see that I showed you before when I asked you about the source, that was written by my great-grandmother. It wasn't written directly to it was written by my great-great-grandmother. It wasn't written to my great-grandmother, but it was written to one of her sisters. So it's still part of my story. I've shown you pictures of my parents, my brother, when we were younger. I've shown you a picture of, and actually 2 of these pictures I only saw this week for the very first time. Because when I was finishing and doing this, I wrote to my mum and I said, Mum, do we actually have photographs of these people? I've never seen them. My mum said, okay, I will go and search. And she sent me the photos and I said, I've never seen these people. The lady at the bottom is my great-grandmother. I know about her. I've seen her gravestone. I know where she lived, where she died, where she was born, but I don't know anything about her. Newspaper articles, photographs, and census reports. The census report up there from 1911. And that's where I want to continue on, census reports. I don't know in every country whether they do them, but I know certainly in this country, and you may actually have heard about them, because in 2021, we had a census not that long ago. A census is a head count of everybody in a country on a given day. They've been taken in England, Wales, and in Scotland, but separately in Scotland, every 10 years since 1801, with the exception of 1941 because it was the war. And the reason they took these censuses was to find out information about individuals. How many people do we have living in the country? How many people are living in a certain town, are living in a certain street, are living in a certain house? They wanted to be able to count everybody once and nobody twice. So you had to do it by your own household. Every household has to make note on that very night of the census, how many people are sleeping in that house. Now, it might have been that you were not actually at home on the night of the census, but you were living with your aunt or uncle. So you wouldn't have been registered with your own parents, but you would have been registered in the house where you were spending. So how was it taken? Well, back in the day, it used to be every census year, a schedule would get delivered to each house. The head of the household had to fill it out with all the information of who was sleeping in that house on the night, and it was always a Sunday. Don't know why they chose a Sunday. Maybe they thought people would always be home on a Sunday. The completed forms were collected, and from 1841 to 1901, the information was copied from what the people filled out. They were copied into the enumeration books, and that's what we still have today. So you can still see all these online or on the microfilms. In 1841, the census was the first to list the names of every individual. And from then on, they've collected more and more and more information over the years. I've put a link at the bottom there where you can find out more information about census records. What dates will they take in? Well, I've listed them there. From 1841 onwards, I've listed the years and the dates in which they were taken. And what I'd like to know is, can anyone tell me why some of them I have colored in purple? So from 1841 to 1911, I've left them in black, but from 1921 until 2021, I've colored them in purple. Can anybody think why I might have highlighted those ones as different. What would be different about those census records that are not the same as the first ones? Maybe if you continue reading down the slide, it might give you a clue. There's a sentence in the next part of the slide, the next question in the slide that might help to give you a clue as to why I've highlighted them in purple.
Well, I think I have a clue, but let's see if any of the Pathfinders can guess.
Can we guess? Why do you think I might have highlighted them?
Okay, so we do have some answers. So somebody's saying privacy laws, and then a few other people are saying because 100 years have not yet passed.
Correct. There is a law, there's a privacy law in the UK that 100 years must pass before these become public records. So you cannot access the records from 1921, even though we're in 2021, this census will not be released until next year, when 100 years have passed. Any reason, any ideas why you think they may have decided to wait 100 years before they released the information on this? It's called a privacy law. What do you think? Why do you think 100 years they would have to wait?
One person on Zoom is saying so that they can all die.
There we go. The chances are that in 100 years' time, most people will already be dead. And so they won't have to protect their privacy anymore because they've collected information about these people, but they've waited 100 years. And so most people, not all of course, but most people will be dead. I've highlighted 1941 because out of all the years, that's the one year that no census was taken. And it was because of the Second World War. A census did take place, however, in 1939. And the reason for that was so that everyone could be issued with a national identity card. Now, interestingly enough, they didn't collect the same kind of information. They only collected names to issue these cards. And so actually the 1939 census, which was a slightly different census, is actually available, and you can see the details of that because it's just names. They're not giving away much information on that. And so you can see them. Well, how does census records help me with my genealogy research? Well, they contain a lot of information. They contain information about my family members, where they were living, when and where they were born, the occupations, whether they were married, and even back in the day, whether or not they could read, whether or not they were deaf, or whether they could speak. So over the years, the amount of information that is gathered in these census records has increased. I've given you some examples here. 1851, the one at the top, 1901 and 1911. And although you can't really make out what they say, they're pretty much giving you the area in which they were taken, the number and name of the house, the names of the people, whether it was the son, the daughter, grandson, a lodger, what the condition was, were they married or unmarried, what age they were as a male or a female, what their occupation was, and where they were born. That's all they asked for in 1851. In 1901, they wanted to know a little more detail. If they were married, if a woman was married, how many years had she been married? When you moved on into some of the later ones in 1911, if the woman was married, how many years had she been married? How many children had she had? And how many of those children were still alive? Or had any of those children died? And for me, out of all the census records that I have researched and that I have seen, the 1911 census records are my very favorites. And there's a specific reason for that as well. If you look at the white ones, it's not that they're white and they're photocopied just because somebody wrote them out. You see, the handwriting is pretty much all the same. And they're photocopies of these enumeration books that I mentioned. The 1911 census is different because it is physically my great-great-grandmother's handwriting. Each of these from 1911 are the actual physical pieces of paper that your ancestors would have completed, or the person that was the head of the household. If they were visiting another family, it would be the head of the household that filled it out, and it would just have mentioned your relative. But Alexander Broomfield and Elizabeth Broomfield were my great-great-great-grandparents. And I can see that that is their physical handwriting, where they lived and how she actually wrote. So to me, 1911 is the most exciting one. I can't wait to see 1921 to see how it compares and whether or not they still have the official ones or whether it goes back to what was written in the books. DNA. Now, this is an interesting one because for Pathfinders in your age category, you'll not be able to do DNA tests yet. You have to be 18 in order to do an ancestry DNA test. But what does your DNA help? How does it help in tracing your heritage? Well, it confirms the area your ancestors came from. You might be able to find out a lot of information, but it's fascinating to know when you've done a DNA test that it can confirm actually what you know, but it also surprises you with a lot of things you probably don't know. It can give you insight into where to search next, or it gives you contact with others who can share the same DNA matches. Now, as I said, for you Pathfinders at this age, you're not able to do them, but you may find that your grandparents have done them. You may find your parents have done them, or an aunt or an uncle has done them. And you can wait and see how you can do them later on when you get to that age, if you want to. Well, on the right, you can see my DNA. My official DNA is very concentrated. And I'll admit, I was quite disappointed when I got the results, because you think, okay, I come from here. I know I was born in Scotland. I know 3 of my grandparents were Scottish and 1 of my grandparents was English. I know that on my dad's side, the Scottish ancestry had come across from Ireland, so I know those countries. I know from my grandmother's side that although she was from England, her heritage came from France. And so I thought, okay, let's see where else. Is there Scandinavian in there? Is there anywhere else? And I got my ancestry back and I thought, well, it confirms what I already knew, but it's a bit disappointing. There's nothing else there. Anyway, I knew what I knew already, but it's nice to have that confirmation to know, okay, this is where my heritage is from. This is where my ancestors came from. The one on the other side of on the page, on the left-hand side of the page, is a different variation. And this is what other people's varieties may look like. They may know where they came from, where grandparents came from, but they might not quite know how diverse it is. And you can see from the color map there that it's pretty diverse to almost all of the continents. My husband's very proud of the fact. He's from Namibia. His heritage is from Namibia and South Africa, Southern Africa. And they knew parts of it. His mother's side came from Europe. But just to see the variety of it was quite fascinating and gave them other places to search. Requirement 12 asks you to visit a city or a county library or a genealogy section or another genealogy research centre and write a paragraph about your visit. It may not quite be possible at this time. You may not have one of these facilities in your area. So this might be one that causes a bit of a challenge for you. But if you can't possibly physically go to visit and write about your visit, you can certainly visit them online. So you can do genealogy research centres online as well as in person. You'll have to see how it works for you in the location that you are in. But if you want to know what types of information is available there, and did you find anything new about your family? As I say, I knew about my Nana's family coming from Southampton area. So many years ago, I went to visit Southampton Library and I found out information there. And then I went to Winchester Research Centre, where they hold all the records, and was able to look through all the actual records that they keep on the microfiche down there. But as I say, a lot of things nowadays you can find on the internet.
Judy, just before you go on, there's a question that's come through.
Yeah, sure.
It's relating to you actually. It's, does knowing the clan your family is from help if your ancestors are from Scotland? So yes, I don't know, maybe are there clan museums or something that might help you out? I don't know.
I haven't actually specifically looked at that. I know that my family has a clan, but the clans were more in the north part of Scotland. I've never gone up to research that. I've seen the signs, I know parts of it, and I'm sure, yes, there are areas available. My family, however, comes from the lowlands. So we come from the more southerly part of Scotland, and as I said, from Northern Ireland and from the Irish coast. So I haven't actually looked into whether or not the clan ancestry would help me much in any way, because at the moment it's more on the other side that I've tried to look. But it's also an idea to try and look. The next requirement asks you to visit a cemetery. Now, it doesn't have to be a cemetery where you know anybody that's died, but visit a cemetery and learn many things about genealogy by copying the headstone. It asks you to name 3 different families, the dates of birth or death of these family members, and the average length of life for these family members. Let's see if we can take an example. The one on the left-hand side, it says, in loving memory of Andrew M. Mackay, beloved husband of Jessie Lamb, that died, and the date, and also the above Jessie, the date in which she died, the age at which she was, and Annie C. Lamb, and the year and date, year she was born, date she died, and then Auntie. So what can we tell from this headstone? Well, we can tell the names of the people that are buried there. We can tell the years, the dates in which they died, and usually you can tell the age at which they were. So from knowing the age they were when they died, you can work out most likely the year in which they were born. So you can also work out, you can either see on it, or you can work out roughly the length of their life. So the example I've given you here, I can tell from this headstone that his name was Andrew Morrison Mackay. I can tell from the headstone that he died on the 9th of October 1920 and aged 29. So pretty much by working it out, if he was 29 in 1920, then he would have been born in 1891. And I can confirm that he actually was born in 1891. And then it says also Agnes Balmer Muir. It tells me her date of death as the 3rd of August, 1977, and she was 87 years. And the note from my genealogy research, she was born Agnes Hewitt Balmer. And she married again. Remember, I mentioned it, that my great-grandfather had died at the age of 29. So she married again after he had died. And that's why the name Muir appears. So she was Agnes Balmer by her maiden name, and she was Muir when she died. So they chose to put both of those names on there. The other one that I read out to you earlier, Andrew M. Mackay, as I say, you can work out what year he was born from when he died and what age he was. Jessie Lamb, what year she died, and the age gives you more or less when she was born. And then Annie C. Lamb, also it tells you the year she was born and the year she died. And so you can work out from that how old she was. And I know for a fact that the M in Andrew's name stands for Morrison, and he was named after his father who had the same name. So the slide before that I showed you was his father, my great-grandfather. And this one here, Andrew M. Mackay, was my grandfather. So when you get to know these things, you can piece them together like a jigsaw puzzle, and you can work it all out. And our last requirement says, check with your local cemetery officials to learn how the upkeep is done, and ask them how you can help with cleanup in a cemetery in your area, and then do it. And maybe this is something that you could do for a Global Youth Day project. Global Youth Day runs every year in March. Maybe you could get together with your Pathfinder team and say, maybe we can go visit a local cemetery, make arrangements and help to tidy up or help to clear up, and make this part of your project. Some resources at the end. There's a lot of free resources on the internet that contain certificates, that have all kinds of information. And I've listed them out for you. As I said, I use the one that's familysearch.org, which is the Latter-day Saints Church. And they have listed by pretty much all over the world, they have scanned records into their archive system. So you can go on for free, you can create a free account, you can search for free throughout the world for records, for birth, death, marriage certificates. You don't always find them. You have to search hard. You can do search results, or if you know the area, you know the year in which people were born, you can do that individual search, but it takes time. And then there are many sites that you can pay for: Genes Reunited, FamilyRelatives.com, Ancestry.co.uk, Scotland's People, Find My Past. And the ones I've also starred, these are ones that I have used in the past or that I do use to do my genealogy search. Often you get free trials on a lot of these pages to see if you really like it. And on special days, you might even get a free access for the day or cheaper access. And often when you look on these sites, even if you're doing the free access, make sure you take a copy, print it to a PDF on your computer so that you have the record when you can't access it anymore without having paid for it. National Archives, Origins Network, Archives, Times Online. And again, as we mentioned, if you have an ancestor also who held a political or special military post in the war, then their records may be protected by the 100-Year Secrecy Act. Now, I'm not sure whether these people in the picture actually were part of these people I just mentioned, but you can see the black lines have been scored through. This record is officially closed, which means they may have served, they may have had special military posts, or they may have been people that they cannot release the information on yet. A few tips just as we come to the end. Don't always believe what you're told. I know we're taught to believe what we're told, but in this case, double check everything for facts. I grew up with the story that my surname used to be spelled M-A-C-K-I-E, which is the Scottish variant of the surname Mackay. And now it's spelled M-C-K-I-E because Decades ago, someone was traveling on a horse many, many miles to go register a child's birth. And when they got home, they discovered that the A had been misplaced. And so now we no longer have the A. Many years later, and many years of searching later, I discovered actually that it was the opposite way round. The name has always been MCKIE. And on that one occasion, with the horse and the travel and the distance, the A had been added mistakenly. So there's one certificate where it has MAC, but all the others are MC. So double check the facts. Even what people tell you, accept it, but double check. Searching overseas might not be as easy as you think because you're not physically there. They may not have the records. I struggle with my Irish heritage because the records were destroyed by fire many years ago. So the physical records are not there. So I kind of hit a brick wall with that. Accept, please, that not all family wish you to know all of the facts. Your family might have a reason why they don't want to tell you all of the facts that you may need to know or want to know in your genealogy research. And I can speak from experience. As I mentioned before, both of my grandparents on my mum's side were only children of unmarried mothers. That was an embarrassment for them in the early part of the 1900s. They would never speak about it. So we never found out any information. Your parents, grandparents, or whoever you ask may have reasons why they don't want you to know everything. So don't force or push the matter if they ask you to respect. You may have to wait many years before you can actually do the public search for yourselves. Get adults' permission and help to go online. You physically as Pathfinders will not be able to access all of these websites because you have to be over 18. Some of them have notice boards and they have sections where you can chat with people. You can post a notification to say, does anybody know this person, Joe Blogs from Timbuktu, that was born in 1920 and married and moved here. And some other people may have done the research or may know a sibling of the person you're researching, but you'll need to get adults' permission for this. Never give up hope. The more people who research, the more information will become available. You may just not have found it yet. And please back up everything in more than one place. And I say this with a heavy heart, and I can see the people I told today smiling. I learned this the hard way, just literally in the past 2 days. While putting my presentation together, I used my hard drive that had all of my genealogy research for the last 20 years on it. And when I went to look at a folder just this morning to put final touches to the presentation, the folders disappeared. It may be my human error and I hit delete by mistake, but it's heartbreaking when you realize that so much research you've done for 20 years has just disappeared. So don't make the same mistake. Back it up in different places. If you want to print it out, or if you keep it on a hard drive, keep it also somewhere else on the cloud that you can access. And the other tip that I have for you, enjoy the journey. It's a lot of detective work. It takes time, it takes effort, but it's an exciting journey. Genealogy is about preserving the past and inspiring the future. A family, like branches of a tree, we all grow in different directions, but our roots remain as one. And it's so much fun to discover where the roots of your family actually originate from. Thank you.